What are the fundamentals of home-scale permaculture? What does permaculture entail? Bill Mollison, who is affectionately known as the father of permaculture, says that the greatest change we need to make is from consumption to production, even if on a small scale in our own gardens. If only 10% of us do this, there is enough for everyone. So really, this is self-sufficiency on steroids. David Holmgren says that permaculture draws together the diverse ideas, skills, and ways of living which need to be rediscovered and developed in order to empower us to provide for our needs while increasing natural capital for future generations. Unfortunately, especially in America, capitalism believes and is founded on greed. It doesn't matter who you impact as long as you're making money. Tell whatever you want to tell just so you can go on. And permaculture means a permanent culture so that all of us can live happily ever after on this planet without destroying the climate for our children to come. Permaculture is, as I said, the permanent culture. It's a philosophy of working with rather than against nature, of protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless labor, and of looking at nature, plants, and animals in all their functions rather than treating any area as a single system. So, why do we think about permaculture design? Well, I've done food production, gardening for a long time. And my dad used to tell me, Allan, you can use your brains or your brawn. Your brains will probably be easier if you use more of it. So permaculture is about intention rather than intensive labor. Being thoughtful and attentive about what you're doing and how you're going to do it rather than just working yourself to the bone. This pictured on the top of a building. I think probably on one of New York's buildings looking across the Hudson into New Jersey, I could be mixed up, is Jeff Lawton. Permaculture design has wide applicability. You use your brain versus your brawn. It's much more productive. You leverage nature's abundance. And it's all about design and then applying that design. And that includes water, access to property, structures, and provisions. Well, okay, so far so good. Sounds pretty normal, logical. Where do we go and how do we do it? Now we're going to take kind of a tour. I have never seen an ideal piece of property. I'm waiting for up there to find it. That's all I can tell you. Every tract of property has advantages and disadvantages. And as long as you have more advantages than you have disadvantages, if you got too many disadvantages, you pass. It's not real hard. But if you are going to think about permaculture and its design and application to a piece of property, you need to go through a property evaluation. You need to look at how you would do the earthworks for water, energy, and conservation and management. Because if you effectively do your earthworks, you can forget about having to irrigate. They are growing stuff in the desert based on this. You could establish a permanent food forest. You can grow perennial foods. What does that mean? Well, that means the plant comes up every year and you pick from it. And if you really are into survival and you're concerned that there may be a time in the future when people will be hurting for food and they may want to come and eat your food, you can have a secret garden of survival. It looks like, well, just a jungle of plants. But the guy that has it picks 6 gallons of food off of it every day. But the person with a pea shooter from Atlanta that's escaped looking for food will pass you by because he doesn't look like any garden he's ever seen before. And that's what you're wanting, I think, if you really want to eat on a survival situation. You want to be able to identify your own food. You want to have plenty of it. But you want to be able to share if you need to. And you want it to be at your discretion, not theirs. You can have self-sufficient housing. We're going to look at a self-sufficient homestead. Well, it's not quite. They buy a little kerosene for lamps. They might buy some other things. They wouldn't have to, but they might, out of convenience, buy some other things. We're going to take a trip and we're going to go see what one looks like. Because we're looking for a permanent culture. I want something for my grandchildren that isn't a hazardous waste site, that they can go to and they can enjoy just like I've enjoyed it. And it requires intentionality to do that. There has been permaculture in some way or other around the world. We just didn't call it that. But rice has been grown in terraces for millennia. Earthworks. One drop of rain hits up here and it goes back and forth and ends up down at the bottom, having watered a whole lot of rice. To me, that's a pretty picture. Very productive. It may not be in Southeast Asia. It may be in South America, Inter-America, Mexico. The terraces on the side of them otherwise unproductive hillside. So how do we do it? Permaculture is grouped in zones. And we usually go from zone 0, which is the house where we live, to zone 5. And those zones are determined by how often we need to use that element and how often we need to service the element. Obviously, if we're going to use or service, the more often, the closer we're going to want it to our house. Okay? And so, Zone 1 is our house. Zone 0 is our house. Zone 1 is the zone that requires frequent attention. That can be the chicken yard. It can be the kitchen garden. Then there may be sitting perennials, herbs, flowers, edible perennials. Zone 3 would be a main crop. It could be any one. I know in the farm that we will be going to look at, they grow wheat. They shock it in shocks. They take it to the thrashing machine that's run by a team of horses, and they thrash the grain. They also grow some corn because they feed the horses and the cows corn. They grow whatever they need, so they have various main crops. And then zone 4 is the semi-wild, the woods or the woodlot, where you cut your firewood if you cut it. And then zone 5 is out there in the woods, raw virgin land. And again, we establish these zones by how frequent we are there and what we need to do in them. And so you can see, and this is a quarter-acre diagram of a quarter-acre lot. Zone 1 is the house. You've got flowers, herbs, intensive garden beds right there in front of the house. Zone 2 is shrubs, bamboo, and berries. You have to be very careful with bamboo, but there is one primary use for bamboo, and that is, in the case of an earthquake, a bamboo stand is the safest place to be. If there are no buildings that will fall on it, it's not going to disintegrate. The roots are too interrelated. You may shake and bump and all the stuff that goes with an earthquake, but unless you go down into a hole in the ground or a lake forms, you're going to be in that clump of bamboo. Now, you can also use it for fishing poles and all other sort of stuff. You can eat bamboo sprouts. You can use it for recyclable firewood if you want. And then you'll notice the chickens are back there, and then there's the kitchen garden in that thing right behind the house. Then there's a food forest behind that. There are raised beds over by the chickens. Then zone 3 is over on our left, fruit and nut trees, firewood. And then back in the back is zone 5, the wild area. You know, just plan it out. Who's to say yours is any better than anybody else's? It needs to include all the elements that you want. As long as you're happy, that's pretty well done. Many of us have treated gray water as sewage all this time. But I'm here to tell you that the new treatment of sewage is a sewage lagoon, where the plants treat the sewage as well as the gray water. And I can show you, you can go on the web and take a permaculture course through the North Carolina University system, and they're going to show you pictures of that high school or school that has that sewage treatment plant in it. Those plants treating their sewage. Different, but certainly at the very least, the gray water can be used. Well, you say, I'm in town. What do I need to know about what's this business of permaculture? You can have your own urban homestead. The edible balcony, and here are several YouTube references, and mini farming, self-sufficiency on a quarter of acre. Path to Freedom is it's a family of 2 daughters, a son, and a father that live within a stone's throw of one of Southern California's freeway. And they make about $20,000 a year on what they grow and sell. besides being self-sufficient there in town. So it can be done. So just because you live in town doesn't mean you have to despair. Things may be a little bit different. Your neighbors may not like a crowing rooster. You may be able to get by with it out in the country, and they may frown on it. But you probably don't have near as many coyotes either. So there you go. Another good book is The Resilient Farm and Homestead, an innovative permaculture and whole systems design approach. This is written by a permaculture designer in Vermont. You can see some of the beds. There are very specific ways to build houses and outbuildings. There are ponds. When David Holmgren visited him, they were ready for supper. He sent several of the children, some to gather vegetables, some to catch some fish for supper, and everything they ate was from their self-sufficient homestead. There are some permaculture resources. JeffLawton.com is an Australian. He's a hoot to watch in his videos. Very entertaining. He is internationally known. He'll show you a picture, a video on the world's best chicken tractor. They scratch the compost out of it and spread it and turn it and everything. And he'll show you a farmer that has a biogas from 2 cows. And he produces enough methane to heat his house, light his house, and cook his meals. And I can show you where you can go buy all those appliances, because they do a lot of that in China. And I have a friend that imports stuff like that. Gaia's Garden is an excellent resource. It's a book about permaculture by that professor that teaches that online free course in permaculture at North Carolina State University. Excellent resource. Introduction to Permaculture, David Holmgren. We talked about The Resilient Farm and Homestead. Mark Shepard in Wisconsin lived on an old style farm, and he wanted to turn it into more regenerative agriculture. And so what he did is he began making changes. He used the Australians' keyline design, the book on how to use the contours of property to put in holding ponds, to water and irrigate down below, and how to take your water across instead of letting it flow down the hill. And you want to slow it and hold it so that it will sink. Jeff Lawton will tell you that where they have done these waterworks, the first year the soil moisture will penetrate 3 feet. The second year the soil moisture will penetrate 9 feet. And the third year of this being established, the soil moisture will penetrate 18 feet. You don't have to worry about any irrigation if you have soil moisture 18 feet deep. So by doing that, and initially you eliminate a whole set of problems. Now, when I do it, I do some of what Mark Shepard does. I do some of, yes, I want an edible landscaping, and I'm going to go back and we're going to talk about this. There is a specific way to plant trees, and in 3 years they will be out producing 10-year-old trees planted by the other way. And I'm going to want to, in those beds that I make in my Earthworks, I'm going to want to take topsoil and I'm going to want to optimize it with all the minerals from a soil test. I'm going to want to mix it, and then I'm going to put it back in those beds, and you wouldn't believe how fast some of that stuff comes out of the ground that way. And then you can plant your permanent plantings there. If you want other crops, you can grow them somewhere else, but you have the ability to grow almost everything you could consume right there on your own place, and you don't have to irrigate it. You don't even have to plant it every year. You've got to just figure out what and how to plant after you do your Earthworks, and then you've got to whack the weeds down, and you got to compost it a couple of times a year and pick it. We're going to talk more about that, because to me, what I have found is that when Mr. Bug comes looking for food and he sees a garden, what does he see? He sees a banquet lined up in a row right there in front of him for him to go right down and chew down. But he doesn't see that when he sees a food forest. There's a bunch of different stuff in here. Some of it I like and some of it I don't. I'm just going to go to an area where I like everything, and I'm going to skip this. Well, great. I didn't want you here in the first place. So there are some real advantages. We know that you can get 3 to 100 times the production. Many of the plants will be supplying needs of other plants. And if you're not careful, you're going to be into a whole integrated system of permanent culture with your home in it, whatever animals you want to have. Now, I'm not big on animals. We have some coyotes, and I like a dog that's big enough to keep them chased away. Chickens, but eggs and chickens are good barter things. You can't beat the barter, and the manure from a chicken is top drawer stuff, especially if the chicken's fed right. And so I have a chicken tractor that spreads the manure one space at a time. In fact, I have 2 of them, and we just go across the land fertilizing it and plowing it all up as we go. And I don't have to do any of it. All I got to do is make sure they have food and water and collect the eggs and move the chicken tractor up every day. And then what do you do for heat? That's a consideration. What about the things you grow? All of those plants. And before long, you are looking at a whole system that instead of you pushing and you supplying inputs all the time, you supply a few inputs, but because of your intention, you get more outputs than you have to make inputs, and it's a whole lot less work. We'll talk about that, and if you build the right house and build the homestead the right way, you can live there quite capably for very, very little. And that's where we're going, and I'm encouraging you to hang in there and study it, because while I might like apples, you might like pineapple, and pineapple will need a whole different set of supporting plants. Some of those plants will supply insect repellents for the insects that will feed on pineapple. Some of them will be nutrient accumulators. that will pull the nutrients up that the pineapple wants. Some of them may be shelter for the pineapple to get them established. But you've got to begin to walk before you can run. And so you need to start growing so that you know how things grow. And then as you grow, there are books that open this whole new vista in front of you of what type of plants to plant. If you like onions, plant multiplier onions. They have an onion, they have some greens, and they go up, and it forms a bulb up here, and then the stem goes down and goes down to the ground. And what does it do when it gets to the ground? It puts down roots and has another stem. That's multiplication. So you get onions, and once you've planted them, and once you keep the weeds out of them and you compost them, you've got ongoing onions. And you don't have to plant onions every year. And you just keep harvesting them. So, as we move forward, we're going to go look at a homestead. We're going to talk about food forests and edible landscaping. And we're going to talk about house construction, how you build a house so that you can heat it with a candle and cool it with an ice cube. It can be done very closely. And then once you get that house built that way, you can afford to put alternative energy on it. You can't afford to do that with an energy hog. You don't have enough. I don't have enough money. Maybe you could afford to do that, but I don't think that's a good use of resources. But if you build the right house in the right way, you can afford to do it. And there's some new technology coming out about that. Only within the last 2 or 3 years has alternative energy become truly affordable through the building technology and some of the technology that's available in the area of generation. So we're going to talk about some of those things and see how close we can get to a permanent culture right down here.